How's it going there, guys? Dave Nader here, and today I have another book review for you. The book that I'm reviewing today is Ghost Story by Peter Straub. This book was written in 1979, and this was a few years before Peter Straub collaborated with Stephen King to write the book The Talisman, but this is the first book that he wrote that really brought him into the mainstream and made him a popular writer, and people started to really take him seriously. And it takes place in the fictional town of Millburn, New York, and it's a small town, and it centers around the four characters of Ricky Hawthorne, Sears James, Louis Benedict, and John Jaffrey, and they're all old men, and they're a part of what they refer to as the Chowder Society, and what they do is they meet together once every 2 weeks in either one of their houses, and they tell each other ghost stories, hence the title of the book. And the book starts, after the prologue that is, about a year after the death of their friend Edward Wanderley, who died very mysteriously, and he also used to be a member of the Chowder Society, but now, of course, it's just down to the four of them. And for the year that's gone on since he's passed away, they've been having nightmares pretty much every night, and they've only been getting worse, and they sense that something is off in the town of Millburn, and they feel like they might be in danger, and they can't put their finger on it, and they're just kind of going off on a hunch, but eventually they decide to contact Dom Wanderley, who is the nephew of Edward Wanderley, and they want to see if they can talk to him and maybe figure out some of their problems and figure out what exactly is going on with them and with the rest of the town of Millburn. And it turns out their hunches are right. There is something weird going on in the town, and as the book progresses, of course, you get a clearer picture of what that is. And once again, have a great horror novel to review on this channel. I love Ghost Story. I really love the way Peter Straub wrote. You know, just his descriptions of the town are so vivid, and you get a very clear picture of the town in your head. And I've always loved that. Like I mentioned in my review of Summer of Night, a little bit over a year ago actually, so it's been a while, that I love horror stories that take place in a small town. And Summer of Night was a story like that, and this book does a great job of highlighting why I really love that type of, I guess, subgenre of horror and fiction. And, you know, his descriptions of the town create so much atmosphere. It's a very creepy town, but it's also a charming town filled with all kinds of charming citizens, and that's another one of the things that I've always loved about horror stories that take place in small towns. Another example would be Salem's Lot, or of course, if we're talking about TV shows, Stranger Things. There's always so much room in a setting like this to have so many different eccentric characters and so many different varieties of characters, and yeah, I loved all the side characters in the story, just even the smallest characters, like you really get a feel for how they actually are as a person, and you get a window into their struggles in life, and it's all interesting, and their daily struggles are just a very interesting little side note to look at, and I love the way Peter Straub wrote them. All the characters in the book are very well written. Let's talk about the main characters. Ricky Hawthorne, he instantly was a very likable character. Of the four in the Chowder Society, I suppose he is the main character. He's the one who is focused on the most, because each chapter in the book focuses on a certain character's point of view, sometimes Ricky, sometimes Sears James, but most of the time it's Ricky Hawthorne, so you get, that was a lot of stuttering. You get the clearest picture of his, innermost thoughts and his inner monologues on, just his everyday life out of all the characters, and he was very likable. Sears James, he's more or less the leader of the group, and he's definitely the most physically imposing of the group, and as well as being pretty much the most eloquent, he's likely the most intelligent out of all of them, and I especially enjoyed his dialogue. John Jaffrey is a doctor, and despite being one of the youngest in the Chowder Society, he has aged the worst out of all of them. He appears to be the oldest by far, and he's really been worn down. There's some interesting and intriguing drama with his character that I really like seeing the book delve into, and especially as certain things are revealed. And with Louis Benedict, he is the most handsome man in Millburn, and he's also the youngest person in the Chowder Society, although he's only comparatively so because he's still a 65-year-old man. But the fact that he is the most handsome and charming man in the entire town of Millburn provokes just a tad bit of jealousy from his friends, but a lot of jealousy from pretty much all the other menfolk in the town of Millburn. And so there's some decent humor that's derive from there. He's a very likable character as well. I loved all the characters and the chemistry that they had with each other. There's excellent dialogue all throughout this book with all of them. And again, they meet once every 2 weeks to tell each other ghost stories, and that's where the title of this book comes from, because this isn't really a ghost story per se, and I won't give away too much about that, although I will talk about it a little bit more later in the review. But the reason it's called ghost story is just because the story is filled with ghost stories, and I really loved reading their ghost stories that they told in the story, and they often have, if not a bit, a majority of truth, because generally when they tell the stories they're talking about something that happened in their past, and you know, again, without giving too much away, the things that occur in their stories eventually, you know, kind of connect over time, and you see how they actually tie in with the narrative, and because of that, it doesn't feel like, you know, you're just reading a novel and all of a sudden just getting sidetracked over this random short story. No, it flows very well, it's very well connected, and they're scary. They're really haunting and scary stories, and I loved reading about the way that each character tells each of the stories, and especially with the case of Dom Wanderley. He's the writer, he's Edward Wanderley's nephew, and besides Ricky Hawthorne, he's probably the character that gets focused the most on in the entire book. Even though he does show up a tad bit later on in the book, you know, he very quickly you realize that he's definitely very important to the story, and because of the fact that each chapter of the book focuses on a certain character's point of view, because he's a writer, a lot of the time his chapters are his own journal entries, and I really love the way Peter Straub wrote his journal entries. They're very cleverly written, and you know, his story that he has to tell is the best out of all of them, if you ask me, and it's just very creepy. And again, despite the fact that the stories all do connect in some way, and you figure that out as the book goes on, and they do connect into the overall overarching narrative, even just taken on their own, they're very fascinating, very intriguing, and they work incredibly well. And I loved all of that, and I also love just seeing the characters react to the stories as they were told. It's very interesting. Also, let's just talk about the scare factor in this book. Yeah, definitely one of the scariest books I've read, period. The villains in this book, I'm not going to give away very much at all, but I'm just going to say that Peter Straub does such an excellent job of painting how vile and evil and disgusting and demented they are. They are really terrifying, and the book paints them as being just such an imminent threat to the characters and the people of the town of Millburn, and they seem almost unstoppable, and that's the, you know, that's really all you could ask for in villains, especially in a horror story. This book is paced very well. Again, when it delves off into the, you know, I guess the short stories, like, it doesn't take away from the pacing at all. It flows very well. I love the characters. It's very well paced, incredibly well written all throughout. It really sticks with you. There's a lot of very memorable imagery, and it's haunting. Like, there's a lot of haunting moments, and as I was reading the book, I was constantly just reading it and like kind of looking around like, And I also loved, again, without delving into it too much, especially when the character of Dom Wanderley shows up, it's hard to describe without getting into straight up spoilers, but there's sort of like a meta aspect to this book. That's really all I'm going to say, but just like read the book and you'll get what I mean, you know, especially if you know what the word meta means. It's, you know, it's just very fantastically well written book. It really gripped me, and you know, as is continuing to be the pattern with my book reviews, you know, most of the books I've reviewed, they're books that I bought a while ago, but just kept on neglecting to read. Did the same thing with this book, and again, I should have read it a long time ago. I love this book, and I'm going to give it an A+. I definitely recommend it. Totally worth checking out. It's, you know, a very scary book, and at the beginning of this review, when I mentioned that it's a small-town horror story in the same vein as Summer of Night, I didn't mean to say that's like a rip-off of Summer of Night or anything. I was just saying I love small-town horror stories, and, you know, it's another great example of that. But anyways, not that I expected you to take it that way. I'm just saying, I'm just clarifying. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this book review. If you liked it, please rate and comment and subscribe. And if you want to, you can also share. Goodbye, guys.